Welcome to Day 2, Lecture 2 on reality. Today we're going to be talking about The Matrix, the movie, as well as David Chalmers' article, The Matrix as Metaphysics. And we'll start off as well by talking about a related view that is actually one of the very oldest thought experiments in philosophy, the Allegory of the Cave by Plato. So we'll start off with Plato, then go to a quick talk about reality and semantics. By talk, I mean a very condensed crash course on how to understand the semantics that Chalmers is talking about. And then we'll talk about Chalmers' really interesting paper, which is also kind of a bizarre paper. All right, so the Allegory of the Cave by Plato. This is a detail from Raphael's The School of Athens, which is very famous. This is Plato, and this is Aristotle, who is the successor of Plato and was a student of Plato. Notice that Plato's pointing at the sky. So Plato's going to be, throughout his entire career, interested in developing the idea that the way things are seen to be around us, the mere appearance of the world to us, doesn't really give us a good indication of its most fundamental character. Aristotle's a little different, and you can see it's a little cut off here, but his hand is splayed out over the earth. And that's supposed to symbolize, and Raphael knew this, it's supposed to symbolize the different attitude that Aristotle had to reality, and thought that reality actually, the way it appeared to us, was sort of a good indication of how it was. All right, so what would it be like to be in a world where things are radically different than they seem? So Plato gives us a great example. So suppose you are amongst an army of prisoners who are shackled in a cave, and you can only look forward, and you're immobile, you can't escape. You're not like totally aware of all these facts. You're sort of gleefully sitting there, and you're staring at a wall upon which many shadows are projected. And those shadows are generated via a fire that is projecting light forward, and various puppets, vases, animal figures that are being carried across a roadway. And when you see all this stuff on the wall, you take it to be the world. In fact, for the prisoners in the cave, reality just is the projections of these figures on the wall. Even your own body, even the way your body appears, is just a projection caused by a fire behind you onto a wall. You can't look back. That's the sort of big point. But, and this is the second part of the Allegory of the Cave, I mean, it's possible to leave. You could be set free and exit to daylight. And when you exit to daylight, Plato explains, it's going to be really bright. The form, the images you saw in the cave are much dimmer than the bright forms you're going to see outside the cave. And it's going to hurt your eyes. You kind of won't like it initially, but you'll get used to it. And you'll come to see that actually there's much to be gained outside of the cave. Yeah, you'll be blinded by the light, but I mean, will the prisoner believe that the real cause of the shadows was less real than the shadows? I mean, after you exit the cave, you'll have a different view of how real or just how fundamental the shadows were. You know, also, would other prisoners be irritated if the free prisoner tried to let them go? So that's another aspect of the Allegory of the Cave. But the big upshot is that there's going to be, once we exit the cave, we'll discover that the perspective we had in the cave was very limited. It was much more limited than the perspective we can take once we're outside of the cave. We've access to a brighter, more real world. And how does Plato understand this? So we did not read this for today, but it's an important complementary idea to the Allegory of the Cave, which is Plato's account of the divided line, which is the preceding section of the Republic. And the book, The Republic, the classic that Plato wrote, is the book from which the Allegory of the Cave is drawn. And the divided line comes right before it. And here, Plato divides the world into two parts. He divides off first the world of appearances. And then he describes the intelligible world. Well, the world of appearances just is the world as it seems as a prisoner in the cave. The intelligible world is the world from the perspective of somebody who's no longer shackled inside of the cave. So it's worth noting, like in the cave, you see things. You see visible things. You have access, and you can you have beliefs about items in the cave. And those images are images of those things. But there's an important sense in which a whole swath of reality is not made available in the cave. And in fact, this idea of a good, the good, was something that Plato thought was very fundamental. In fact, Plato thought that the good was how we should understand the sun in the Allegory of the Cave. So let's map the Allegory of the Cave onto the divided line. So at the very bottom is the idea that we saw shadows in the wall as prisoners, and those are like the images that we see in our everyday life. So it's like we see an image of my hand, I see an image of this computer. Those are all just like the images that are projected onto the cave wall in the Allegory of the Cave. And there's these states of mind that correspond, and imagining is what generates images for Plato, icasia. But beyond the images are also the things themselves that are responsible or that appear responsible for the images, or that appear to me in experiences, and I have beliefs about them. And those correspond to in the Allegory of the Cave, the seeing objects by the light of the fire. So if you're just looking at the shadows on the wall, that's what merely having images would be. But then, those images are caused by people who are carrying things on the roadway. But the important thing is that the people carrying things on the roadway, sure, they cause the images, and those are sort of the things that are supposed to correspond to the visible things, but they're not the most fundamental aspects of the world. So Plato thinks that instead that, when we go outside, we're going to be able to see things dimly. When we leave the cave, we can see things dimly, and that's like seeing mathematical objects. Like, think about it. When you leave the cave, you'd be able, and suppose you did it at night, suppose you left the cave at night, you would leave and you would see not like the detail of things, but you would see like the sketches of them, like the outlines of them. Just like mathematics and geometry give us the outlines or the shapes of things. But we want to see them in their full glory. That, Plato thinks, comes with the forms. That's when we see things by the light of the day, the light of the sun. But, there's something that's painful that we can undergo beyond just seeing the forms. We can also look into the sun itself. The sun, which is the origin of, Plato maintains, actually all of these different things. And the sun is what Plato thinks of as the good which is the cause of all things. So on this picture, Plato thinks that reality that we see is a very small part of what is real, and moreover, it's not even the most fundamental part of the world. Appearances, even if they're not misleading, definitely don't tell us about the good by themselves. And you can, it's worth considering how to compare this to what Descartes was saying. Because Descartes also thinks we're going to ascend to this thing, a thinker, and thinking intelligence is like thinking. So there's an important sense in which thinking is important for both Plato and Descartes. But I'll leave this as just a suggestion for right now, and we can talk about it in discussion. All right, so let's go on to reality and semantics. So Steven Pinker claims gives the following definition for semantics. He says it's about the relation of words to thoughts, but it is also the relation of words to other human concerns. Semantics is about the relation of words to reality, the way that speakers commit themselves to a shared understanding of the truth, and the way that their thoughts are anchored to things and situations in the world. So this little image here is what linguists and semanticists call the triangle of reference, or the semantic triangle. We don't need to understand the ins and outs of this, but it's just important for you to sort of understand that there are different components that are at work in giving an account of semantics, which again is a theory of meaning, or as Pinker says, it's an account of the relationship between words and symbols and reality. So we have symbols like words. Like in English, there's the word earth. In German, there's the word Erde, and if there are other, I actually can't think of any other languages where we have earth. Terra, Latin. So there's terra. So if Erde, terra, and earth are all symbols, okay? And they symbolize actually a single thought, which is just the thought I'm having when I think about the earth. So the words or the languages might be different from the thoughts themselves. At least that's one way to think of it. And those thoughts all refer to one thing, the earth. So there's a difference between the things, the symbols, and the thoughts. Philosophers say a lot about all these things, and some philosophers identify one with the other, but it's important to know that there's at least a distinction between, at least a notional distinction between all these things. Whether I'm speaking German and saying Erde, or whether I'm speaking English and saying earth, I can use different symbols to refer to the same referent, to the same thing. And this is the sort of thing that semanticists talk about. Okay, for today's purposes, we need to think about two different semantic theories. One is semantic internalism, and the other is semantic externalism. So according to semantic internalism, words get their meanings from how our brains represent, describe, or imagine the world. According to semantic externalism, words get their meaning from causal connections between us and the world, not from mental images or descriptions that individuals associate with those words. So according to semantic externalism, meanings just ain't in the head, okay? So this distinction will be helpful for understanding Chalmers, as we'll see in a minute. But first, I want to begin with a topic that is near and dear to all of your hearts. Online dating. So, suppose we're talking about a woman who's online dating. We're going to call her Vera. This is a stock footage of a woman. Okay, so I have no idea who this is. This is free content from the internet. This is Vera. Now, suppose Vera is online dating Jeff. Okay, this is Ryan Gosling. So if you don't know who Ryan Gosling is, then watch any of a number of films, including the movie Drive. Okay, so suppose now Vera, who's online dating Jeff, is talking about Jeff. She's talking with her friends about Jeff. She's having thoughts about Jeff. She writes things down about Jeff. She types things about Jeff. And the question I want to pose is, how do we determine the meaning of Jeff? How do we determine the referent of Jeff when Vera says it? Well, let's put a few more things on the table to describe everything. So in online dating, it's a little different from everyday dating because the causal link you have to the person you're dating is via the internet. Okay, so there's this causal link via OkCupid or whatever, Tinder, between Vera and Jeff. Okay, what else is going on? Well, of course, Vera has associations and images and psychological states that represent Jeff. Okay, she has what you might call mental representations of Jeff. And she might have thoughts like Jeff is a blonde and slender investment banker. Ooh la la. Okay. And all this is happening, and she uses the word Jeff, and she has thoughts about Jeff. So the question is, how do we determine the referent of Jeff? And there are two different views about how this works: semantic internalism and semantic externalism. According to semantic internalism, the psychological states of Vera are what grounds the relationship between the word Jeff, the symbol Jeff, and the guy. Let me say that one more time. According to semantic internalism, these mental images that Vera has are what are responsible for linking up the word Jeff when Vera says it and the guy Jeff, okay? The guy on the other end of the line. This view, semantic internalism, contrasts with semantic externalism. According to semantic externalism, we don't care about mental images and all these psychological states and how they represent him. What we care about instead is the causal link. The causal link between Jeff and Vera. And this causal link just is the OkCupid or internet connection. Exactly how Vera imagines Jeff is irrelevant according to semantic externalism. That's what we meant before here when we said that according to semantic externalism, meanings ain't in the head. What that means is that this sort of mental image is not responsible for linking Jeff to its meaning, to the guy. Okay, so now this might seem a little bit strange, and you might be like, what are we talking about exactly? This seems a little bit theoretical. But let's think about catfishing. Okay, so I know none of you have been catfished before, nor have I, but I have seen the television show Catfish on MTV, and this is probably before all of your time. But you can still go on MTV and stream this, so I highly recommend this. It is not a piece of science fiction. It's a piece of reality television. But you can see a bunch of different instances of catfishing that might fall into the two different categories that I'm about to describe. Okay. So in catfishing, for those of you who don't know what catfishing is, this is what would happen in catfishing. Vera would be on OkCupid talking with a person who she represents like this. She might be like, oh yeah, this guy. He claims he's Jeff, and Jeff is a blonde and slender investment banker, and oh la la. But the man on the other side, or whoever it is, on the other side of the connection, on the other side of the internet, looks nothing like this. He doesn't satisfy this mental image in any significant way. Instead, he's this guy, the catfish. Now, this, by the way, is the comic book guy from The Simpsons. If you've not seen the comic book guy from The Simpsons, I highly recommend you YouTube it. Okay. So, Jeff, this guy who looks nothing like this, is being represented by Vera as this, and Jeff is manipulating Vera into forming this mental representation of him. That's what catfishing is. Okay. And the show Catfish involves them basically going to the catfish's house and then exposing them for the fraud they are. Okay? All right, so there are actually two different ways to understand how catfishing works, though. One is in terms of semantic externalism, and the other is in terms of semantic internalism. So let me get my microphone a little closer here. According to semantic externalism in catfishing, the word Jeff refers to the brown-haired comic book guy. It refers because of the causal link between Vera and Jeff. So in that case, if what matters is the causal link, then the word Jeff, as Vera uses it, really does refer to the catfish. All right? Vera's thought Jeff is a blonde insider investment banker is about the comic book guy. It's about the catfish, but it's a false thought about him. Okay, so Vera's thought that I am chatting with Jeff is true. Okay, what's not true is that, well, Jeff is a blonde and slender investment banker. Now, this contrasts with semantic internalism. According to semantic internalism, it would say, in catfishing, the word Jeff does not refer to anyone. Why? Well, instead, Jeff refers to no one because no one corresponds to the image, the mental representation that Vera has formed. So Vera's thought that Jeff is a blonde and slender investment banker is not about the comic book guy at all. It's not about the catfish at all. Jeff doesn't refer to anyone. It doesn't refer to the catfish. It doesn't refer to a mental image. It refers to nothing. Instead, these thoughts are like illusions. They're illusory thoughts. They make no claims about anyone in the real world. So Vera's thought that I am chatting with Jeff is not true. Compare that to externalism, which says, while you are indeed chatting with Jeff, it's just that, and that's true. And it's just what's not true is that everything you think about Jeff is, not true. Whereas here, it's not even true according to semantic internalism that I'm chatting with Jeff. Okay, let's unpack this a little bit with more cartoons. So, according to semantic internalism, again, Vera's thinking about Jeff or saying Jeff all the time. According to semantic internalism, I am talking to Jeff is not true. Why is that? Well, because the mental image does not match this guy. Ryan Gosling is a more strapping lad than the comic book guy. And for that reason, when Vera talks about Jeff, that word does not refer to this guy, according to semantic internalism. Now, contrast that with semantic externalism. According to semantic externalism, yes, Jared talks about Jeff, and moreover, because of this causal link, Jeff refers to the comic book guy. It refers to the catfish. Why? Because the catfish is causing Vera to use this word in a certain way. There's a causal link between the catfish and Vera, and Jeff refers to the catfish. So in this case, I'm talking to Jeff is true. Jeff is just a catfish. But the belief that Vera has that Jeff is a blonde and slender investment banker is false. And I mean, you could even cash this out and argue for these theories based on the many responses you will see on the show Catfish. There's just many different ways to respond to the revelation that the person you're talking to on an online dating platform is a catfish. So here are two very different responses you might have. One is that, suppose Vera is a semantic externalist. Here's what she would say. You suck, Jeff. You totally misrepresented yourself to me. You lied about yourself. None of the things you said about yourself are true. But notice she's still saying Jeff. She still thinks that the person she met on the show Catfish, after the catfish was exposed as a fraud, she still thinks that her term Jeff refers to that person. It's just that that person misrepresented themselves to her. But contrast this with a very different way of responding, and I've seen this on Catfish sometimes. I'm a Catfish scholar. So if Vera is a semantic internalist, then here's what she would say. Who are you? You call yourself Jeff, but the Jeff I know is a slender investment banker. Apparently the Jeff I imagined is a complete fantasy. Now I know that he does not even exist. I don't know who you are, but you're a completely distinct person from Jeff. I don't know from the Jeff I thought I knew. I don't know who you are. I want to have nothing to do with you. Okay. So on that view, Vera is saying, not only did you misrepresent yourself, I don't even know who you are. Why? Well, because my mental images don't match who you are. And since what matters when it comes to meaning are my mental images and not the causal link, according to semantic internalism, since the mental images are what matter, I don't know who you are. So that's a broad sketch of semantic internalism versus semantic externalism. Semantic externalism is going to just say that, listen, the images are not what matters. What matters is the fact that you're causally coupled or causally related to the items that are the reference of the symbols you're using and the thoughts you're having. Okay? So this is complicated. If you have questions about this, please come to discussion with them. Okay? And we'll talk more about it. But this should sort of butter you up a little bit, though, for what Chalmers is arguing in his article, The Matrix as Metaphysics, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Life in the Matrix. This is a reference to the movie Dr. Strangelove, geez, to Dr. Strangelove, which is subtitled "How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb." If you've not seen Dr. Strangelove, it is one of the best movies ever made, so you should watch it. In addition to all the other things you're watching for this course. Okay, this is a scene. This is a depiction of a scene from The Matrix. This is David Chalmers. This is David Chalmers' post-short haircut. David Chalmers is so famous in philosophy that like people know of, like, he's like Madonna, where people are like, ooh, there was early Madonna, and then there was like middle Madonna, and there's like stage 5 Madonna, and then there's late Madonna. Chalmers also has like early stage Chalmers with like long hair, and then late stage Chalmers with this very short haircut, and then I think he's maybe regressed back out. Suffice it to say that he's a very famous philosopher at one of the most prestigious philosophy departments in the world, at NYU. He's probably most famous for being a property dualist. He's a dualist. He thinks that the mind and the body are distinct things. Most people today, including most psychologists and cognitive scientists, think that physicalism is true, that the mind and the body are not distinct things. Okay. Just to hammer this point about the Madonna metaphor home, here's earlier Chalmers, but this is like stage 3 Chalmers, not stage 1 Chalmers. And he looks, I will leave the comparisons to you about who he looks like. He does look a lot like Descartes, though. And Descartes is also a dualist. So I leave it to you to draw more conclusions. Maybe he looks like the comic book guy, too. But all right, so how does Chalmers start his argument? This article is a very good model for how to format a paper. It's a good model about how you should format your arguments. Like in our intro video, it has, as I explained in the writing intro video, there's an introduction section to this paper by Chalmers. And then this paper then has a positive argument, and then Chalmers responds to objections, and then he has some concluding thoughts. So that's a very standard philosophy paper. Okay, but Chalmers begins with the idea of a skeptical hypothesis. So he thinks a skeptical hypothesis is a hypothesis relative to some proposition P, there's our good old friend the proposition, such that 1, we cannot rule the hypothesis out with certainty, and 2, were we to accept it, we would reject the belief that P. So, there's a very natural reading of the evil demon hypothesis and the evil demon argument we looked at in the previous lecture, according to which the evil demon hypothesis is a skeptical hypothesis. So like you might think, well, point 1, we can't rule out the evil demon hypothesis with certainty. 2, if we accepted the evil demon hypothesis, we would reject the belief that P, where that belief would be like everything but the cogito. Everything but the cogito would be subject to doubt, right? So like relative to our beliefs about the external world, the evil demon hypothesis is a skeptical hypothesis because the evil demon hypothesis undermines our beliefs in the external world. All right. And then the dream hypothesis might, it's not going to be undermining as many beliefs. The dream hypothesis might undermine just some of the beliefs I have about maybe today. Maybe I'm just dreaming today, right? In that case, the dreaming hypothesis is a skeptical hypothesis about maybe what I'm perceiving right now. Maybe my beliefs about the external world right now are undermined, but not all of my beliefs I've ever had about the external world. Okay. And then we just looked at the allegory of the cave. Is the allegory of the cave a skeptical hypothesis? That is, if I'm a prisoner in the cave, is it, number 1, the case that we can't rule that hypothesis out with certainty? Well, yeah, not clear. But 2, if we were to accept that hypothesis, what beliefs will we reject? So it's not clear that the allegory of the cave is actually like this. I would be happy to hear an argument from one of you to the effect that actually the allegory of the cave is a skeptical hypothesis according to this format. But it's just not clear to me that it is. It might be. Now, the big question that we're going to look at now is whether the matrix hypothesis, which we've not explained yet, but whether the matrix hypothesis is a skeptical hypothesis. In fact, as we'll see Chalmers claim, neither this hypothesis nor the evil demon hypothesis amount to a skeptical hypothesis. So what is the Matrix anyway? What is it? So I'm not going to explain it. I'm going to allow this movie clip to do it.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
And he takes the red pill, and movie begins. Well, it's already begun, but the movie's main plot line begins. So what, as Morpheus just indicated, the Matrix is everywhere. It's always been there. It's the world as it's appeared to us. Okay. How should we, given the other things that come to light about the Matrix, how should we understand it? Well, I mean, as we saw in the movie, people are strapped into these chairs and they're sleeping. There's they look like bodies. And then there's like the Matrix, which is how you by being in these chairs, you access the Matrix. And then there's presumably some sort of input-output structure. This is the cognitive system. Okay, this is the cognitive system, or what Chalmers will just label the mind. There's input-output, and there's the Matrix, where you're there's like a bunch of bits computing stuff, and like you're in the Matrix, and your Aunt Ethel is here, Polly, your 6th grade girlfriend, is here, toss out AOL discs. This image is like from 1999, when you don't even know what AOL discs are, but whatever. Dial-up internet was the scourge of the world. The cheese sandwich you had for lunch, Jehovah's Witnesses, even in the Matrix. I have nothing against Jehovah's Witnesses. It's just that they're going to still be in the Matrix. So there's this relationship between the Matrix and the cognitive system. Now, what is the Matrix? On a common understanding, if we're in the Matrix, then the external world is not at all as it seems. Now, the Matrix hypothesis, unlike the demon hypothesis, the evil demon hypothesis, it doesn't like threaten our beliefs that 2 + 3 = 5, but it does maybe, as some might think, threaten other beliefs. Now, the Matrix hypothesis, simply put, is just the idea that I'm invaded and have always been invaded. Again, invaded is just this. You're in these chairs, right? That is, I have a cognitive system, you're strapped in the chair, which receives its inputs from and sends its outputs to a matrix. Again, that matrix is this business on the right-hand side. Cool. But, as we just said, you might think, wait, if Morpheus is right, then the matrix is a huge illusion. And if you thought that, you'd actually believe what the writers of the dust jacket for the VHS tape for The Matrix thought in 1999. So what do they say? Perception. Our day in, day out world is real. Reality. The world is a hoax, an elaborate deception spun by all-powerful machines of artificial intelligence that control us. Whoa. And that's a whoa. That was before marijuana was widely legal, so that's pretty good. So the world is the presupposition behind these observations that are written by the people who wrote this dust jacket is that the world is a hoax. It's sort of an illusion. It's an elaborate deception, and it deceives us. You could conclude from this dust jacket, or out of the beliefs of the people who wrote this dust jacket, that they thought that being in the Matrix caused you to have tons of false beliefs. So yeah, the writers of the cover for the VHS version of The Matrix believe that the Matrix hypothesis is a skeptical hypothesis. That is, if you're in the Matrix, if the Matrix hypothesis is true, then most of your everyday beliefs are false. All right. This is where Chalmers comes in. Chalmers' view is as follows. The Matrix hypothesis, capital H, is not a skeptical hypothesis. It is a metaphysical hypothesis. The metaphysical nature of what I perceive is not quite what I thought it was. So wait a minute. That means Chalmers is going to say that the Matrix hypothesis, if it's true, does not entail that our everyday beliefs are false. It's not a skeptical hypothesis. But what does he mean by the fact that it's a metaphysical hypothesis? Well, let's unpack it. There's three parts to this thing. So one part is that we're going to claim that physical processes are fundamentally computational. Secondly, there's two parts to this claim. On the one hand, our cognitive systems, our minds, are not equivalent to physical processes. And second, to B, our cognitive systems interact with physical processes. Kind of makes sense. Systems can't be the processes that they interact with. And third, these physical processes were created by beings outside of physical space-time. All right, so these are pretty loopy. But let's try to put them together into a single picture. So what does Chalmers say? He says we still have bodies, and there are still chairs and tables. It's just that their fundamental nature is a bit different from what we may have thought. That is how we should understand the world, according to Chalmers, if we're in the Matrix. Now notice, all that I did so far is just tell you what the Matrix hypothesis is. I've not given you any argument for it. How is Chalmers going to argue for it? Partially, you're going to tell me how he does so in your first assignment for this course. I'm going to help you a little bit right now. There's going to be some explanation. So how does the argument go? Well, the idea is that there's the creation hypothesis, the computational hypothesis, and the mind-body hypothesis. And Chalmers' goal is to show that all of these hypotheses, every single one of them, first of all, when you conjoin them all, they result in the matrix hypothesis with an assumption we won't talk about. But even though they all entail the matrix hypothesis, none of these hypotheses by themselves is a skeptical hypothesis. So if none of these hypotheses by themselves are a skeptical hypothesis, then the matrix hypothesis is not a skeptical hypothesis. And that's the conclusion that Chalmers wants to show, namely that the matrix hypothesis is not a skeptical hypothesis. Okay, so let's go through each of the sub-hypotheses, each of the three hypotheses. The first one is the creation hypothesis. And this is just the familiar idea that you might have gleaned from theism or various religions that, well, there's a creator. The creator creates the atoms. Or creator creates the world. Not just the atoms, in fact, the world. And this should be intuitive to those who have like a religious background. But the idea is that there's this creator outside of this world that creates it. Notice that this actually doesn't entail theism. It doesn't entail that there's gods. It just entails that there's some being outside of this world, as Chalmers puts it sometimes, one world down, who generates or creates this world. Okay. What about the computational hypothesis? On this view, there are these bits, algorithms that compute the world. These bits are responsible for everything we see in the world. The way our bodies look, the atoms of the universe, whatever constitutes the atoms. All of these things are due to computation. All right. Thirdly, there's the mind-body hypothesis. And this is just the idea that our mind, so this again is like Neo in the chair, in the upload chair. Your mind is in causal interaction with these atoms. Well, the atoms are just the physical world. This is supposed to just symbolize the physical world, right? Atoms are what constitute it. All right, and that's the mind-body hypothesis. Again, like some people actually did think this, like Descartes, for example, thinks that a mind is a different substance from the physical world. What he called res cogitans is different from the res extensa. So it's not like this has never been defended in the history of philosophy. It seems like a coherent position. Now remember, all Chalmers needs to show is that for each of these three hypotheses, that number one, they're coherent. They're not philosophically mumbo-jumbo. Secondly, each of these hypotheses don't amount to a skeptical scenario. And he seems to have a point. Like, is the mere fact that the world is created sufficient to show that the skeptical hypothesis is true of this world? If so, then, suppose theism is true, that God created the world, that a God or gods created the world. Well, if that's true, then we're in a skeptical scenario. But that seems wrong. It seems like the fact that God created the world has really very little to do with whether or not we're in a skeptical scenario. Similarly here, why think that there's any skeptical hypothesis behind claiming that, well, there's these, at the bottom, most fundamental layer of things, there's just a bunch of bits. And the bits are what are responsible for the physical world. Yeah, it's a little bizarre, but like, why exactly can't you think that? We'll revisit this, the objections, because there's going to be reasons why you might not think that. And here, why I think this is skeptical. This is just interaction of your mind and your body. Your mind and the physical world, coupling in this way. What's skeptical about that? And when we concatenate all these views together, you get this nice picture where the creator is responsible for the world of bits. My mind hooks up to that world, or a mind, or the cognitive system hooks up to that world with an input-output system that's causally linking the mind with the matrix. This is the matrix, the physical world. And these bits, these algorithms, are responsible for the physical world. So I should say, I was a little bit sloppy. The mind is in an input-output relationship with the matrix, with all these bits. The bits, in turn, are what are responsible for the physical world. That's a slight point, but... All right, that's a metaphysical hypothesis. And on this description, the metaphysical hypothesis the matrix hypothesis is a metaphysical hypothesis, not a skeptical hypothesis. In other words, we just give you a whole picture of what the matrix is that does nothing to substantiate the skeptical hypothesis where everything's a big old illusion. Note that it's very similar to this idea that, like, merely by being in causal relationship with the person who's catfishing you, your Alvera's use of Jeff refers to whoever's on the other line, on the other end of the line. Okay? So in that respect, the matrix hypothesis has this commonality with semantic externalism, which is the idea that your mind is causally related to the world, and in virtue of that, your thoughts are about things in the world. And in fact, we can put it this way. even though your, image of, say, if your catfish doesn't match the basic nature of the world, it doesn't like Ryan Gosling does not look like a bunch of bits, a bunch of algorithms. Nevertheless, this is Jeff, sorry. Even though Jeff does not look like a bunch of bits, nevertheless, Jeff refers to the aspects of the matrix, the bits, that are responsible for the physical world. And because of this causal relationship, whenever Vera thinks about Jeff, those thoughts refer to something. So her claim that I'm talking to Jeff is true. Weird. So, just to hammer this home again, Vera in the Matrix, if we look at this scenario, if Vera is in the Matrix, she has at least some true beliefs, like I'm talking to Jeff. That's an everyday belief she has that's totally true in the Matrix. Let's unpack it a little bit. So there's two important and related points, and then we'll illustrate both of them. One is that most of Vera's beliefs in the Matrix come out true. And secondly, Jeff exists in a way that is not dependent on Vera's mind, even in the Matrix. So here we're talking about I'm trying to illustrate to you how the existence of other people would work in the Matrix, and why we shouldn't think that our everyday beliefs about other people and other things are mistaken. Well, one is that because Vera's beliefs come out true because in the Matrix, names like Jeff refer to certain complex algorithms. So like Jeff refers by the causal input-output structure to some bits. There's this causal link. So I'm talking to Jeff is true. Moreover, words like slender refer to certain complex algorithms or algorithm types. And for that reason, also Vera's use of the word slender and her thoughts about slenderness refer to things in the physical world, which are, again, constituted by bits. Why? Because Vera's thoughts about slenderness, the mind of Vera, the mind's thoughts, the mind that Vera has thoughts, and those thoughts refer to things in the physical world. And for that reason, Jeff is a blonde and slender investment banker is true. So here's another belief that comes out true according to Chalmers. Jeff is a blonde and slender investment banker. All right, so according to Chalmers, the Matrix is more analogous to online dating than catfishing in an important respect. Why? Because all of our everyday beliefs in the Matrix are true. So recall, according to semantic externalism, at least some of our beliefs were false about the catfish. But actually, in the Matrix, if the Matrix is more analogous to online dating, because at least these beliefs are true, right? Because you have the causal link. Even though it's not exactly how you thought it was, it's still a causal link. And moreover, Jeff exists in a way that is not dependent on Vera's mind, because you might have thought initially, oh gosh, in the catfishing case, Jeff is just a figment of Vera's imagination. But in the Matrix, so if we think of Jeff as being, as a person who appears in the Matrix, Jeff could still be a person and still have a mind, such that Jeff is not merely in Vera's mind. In other words, Jeff doesn't depend on Vera's mind at all. Jeff is not merely a figment of Vera's imagination. Well, to see why that's the case, the idea is that these bits are what metaphysically underlie the physical world, not Vera's mind. Vera's mind does not underlie the physical world. It's the bits that do. Similarly, it's the bits that underlie the physical appearance of Jeff. And I neglected to note, Jeff probably has a mind of his own, in which case Jeff's mind is coupled up with his body, and by being coupled up with the Matrix. Okay? It gets complicated, but the idea is that whether or not Vera's mind is coupled up with the Matrix, Jeff is still going to exist. If that's true, then Jeff's existence is independent of Vera. And recall, this is on the computation hypothesis, this is what we're looking at. Notice that, I mean, it could even be the case that Vera's images of Jeff do match Jeff, the real guy, in the physical guy in the Matrix. It's just that Jeff, the real guy, his bodily appearance is grounded in a weird algorithmic structure of bits. So Vera's mental images would match the bodily and physical Jeff, but they would not match, obviously, this weird set of bits that underlies Jeff. Okay? Some objections. All right, so I'll make this pretty quick. Here's an objection. A brain in a vat may think it is outside walking in the sun, when in fact it is alone in a dark room. Surely it's deluded. This is something you surely thought of while you were going through this lecture. What does Chalmers say? No, he says, the brain is alone in a dark room, but this does not imply that the person is alone in a dark room. The moral is that the immediate surroundings of our minds may well be irrelevant to the truth of most of our beliefs. What matters is the process that our minds are connected to by perceptual inputs and motor outputs. So again, I was talking shorthand by saying a lot of the time that Vera was coupled. That's not really accurate. What's most accurate is that the mind of Vera is coupled with the body of Vera. But it's just false to say that because your mind is in a dark room, therefore your body is in a dark room. Why? Well, because there's this causal relationship that separates the two. And it's just a mistake to conflate the mind with the body on this view, on the matrix hypothesis. But here's another objection. Okay, Dave, so how about this? Before he leaves the matrix, Neo believes that he has hair. But in reality, after he takes the pill and leaves the matrix, he has no hair. He's like this baby who awakes. Surely this belief is deluded. Chalmers is like, well, Neo's concept of hair, quote hair, does not refer to real hair, but to something else that we might call hair star, virtual hair. So the fact that Neo does not have real hair is irrelevant to whether his belief is true. Neo really does have virtual hair, so he is correct. And the way to think of this is, I mean, Neo as a cognitive system is still causally related to the bits that underlie his hair in the matrix. So whenever he thinks about hair, he's in the matrix, he's always going to be thinking about whatever hair is in the matrix. And it just turns out that hair is what underlies that hair is all these bits. When he steps out of the matrix, yes, his concept of hair changes. It no longer refers, he'll have to develop a new concept of hair that refers to things in the outside world and not to the bits. But that's precisely what we should think on the externalist view, where what matters is the causal relationship. This is pretty complicated. We could talk about this in section as well. But the point is that Neo's hair is in here. Neo's hair star is here. I should note, from our perspective outside of the matrix, we have different concepts because we're in different causal relationship with things. We don't relate in an input-output structure to bits. That's not how we the people outside of the matrix, relate to things. Our causal relations have to do with non-simulated stuff. Non-input-output stuff. But that's not how Neo is in this case. Objection 3. Aha, gotcha, Dave. You just said that Neo has virtual hair and virtual hands, and that these are not real hands. Doesn't this mean that in a matrix, we don't have real hands? No. If you are not in the matrix, again, we're outside of the matrix, but our other beings are. Sorry, if we are not in a matrix, again, we're outside the matrix, but other beings are, like Neo, we should say that their term hand refers to virtual hands. That's from our perspective. But our term does not. Our term hand, quote hand, refers to the physical stuff. That is not not underlied by bits. So in this case, our hands not in the matrix aren't virtual hands. But if we are in a matrix, then our term hand refers to something that's made of bits, virtual hands, or at least something that would be regarded as virtual hands by people in the next world up. That is, if we are in a matrix, real hands are made of bits. Things look quite different, and our words refer to different things depending on whether our perspective is from inside or outside the matrix. And the important thing to just re-emphasize is that what matters is what are you in causal relationship with when you use the term hand and when you have thoughts of hands. If you're in causal relationship with bits, according to the externalist idea, you're going to be, all of those thoughts are going to refer to bits. If you're related to hands that are not made of bits, your concepts will relate to the non-bit constituted hands. Okay. So again, real does not refer to things composed of bits here. But if you're in the matrix, real does refer to things composed of bits, which is kind of an odd thought. Okay. So again, the idea that our words are fixed by the causal relationship between our minds and what those words refer to is central. Objection 4. Listen, Dave, this is all terribly clever, but shelve the theorizing for a second. If Jeff's slenderness and investment banking are made up of algorithmic computations, then the world is nothing like we think it is. Chalmers is just like, I deny this. Even if we're in a matrix, there are still people, football games, particles, arranged in space-time just as we think there are. It's just that the world has a further nature that goes beyond our initial conception. Remember, the causal relationship between our minds and the matrix ensures that most of our terms refer to particular things in the matrix. But wait, this is precisely the point that is way too weird. How could your body be made of algorithmic bits? And Jeff, how could his body be made of algorithmic bits? Like, this is just, like, you think the computation hypothesis is coherent, but why think it's coherent? It just seems too bizarre, right? How could these underlie Jeff, the physical guy? Yes. Well, here's how Chalmers would respond. He would say, well, you think that the idea that the world is most fundamentally constituted by bits is weird. But let's do a different thought experiment. Suppose the following. Suppose that what underlies physical bodies are one-dimensional objects. Straight lines? Huh? That possess particular vibrational states? Like what, violin strings are the things that underlie the world? That look zero-dimensional? They look like zero-dimensional point particles? What? That possess 11 space-time dimensions? And that are described by a theory called magic mystery membrane theory, M theory? Oh wait, that's just string theory. So Chalmers is going to say, why think that the computational hypothesis is any more bizarre than string theory? Why think that the idea that strings, these apparently zero-dimensional, one-dimensional objects, why think that those are any weirder than a bunch of informational bits? So if you wanted to say that it's just too weird, if this metaphysics is just too weird for you, then you need to explain why this metaphysics is less weird. Objection 6. The matrix hypothesis implies that a computer simulation of physical processes exists, but unlike the metaphysical hypothesis, it does not imply that physical processes themselves exist. So these are not equivalent hypotheses. I find this to be a pretty interesting objection because it suggests that we do need to make a distinction between a simulation of a physical process and just a physical process. And the question is, how do we make that distinction? Well, Chalmers responds by saying that actually my argument does not require that simulation equals reality. And he gives two principles: that any abstract computation that could be used to simulate physical spacetime is such that it could turn out to underlie real physical processes. And the second principle is that given an abstract computation that could underlie physical processes, the precise way in which it is implemented is irrelevant to whether it does underlie physical processes. So if you thought this objection was good, you need to show why one of these two principles is false. Okay? And to be honest, I have a hard time, I have certain views about how we might respond to these principles. But if you wanted to pursue this objection, you would need to show why Chalmers' response in these two principles is unsatisfying. So if all that is right, then even if we're in the matrix, most of our everyday beliefs about the world are true. The matrix might be an evil place. It might be a place where we have been just the toys of a bunch of very advanced life forms that in a dystopian future pot us into vats and generate a type of reality that's radically different from the dystopian world. But what's not true, according to Chalmers, is that those people in the matrix are massively deluded. They might be manipulated, but their beliefs are by and large true. Next week, we're going to talk about, since we've been talking about minds quite a bit and cognition quite a bit, we're going to think more carefully about what exactly cognition is and what it would actually be to have a mind that's radically different from ours. So I'll see you in section then, and then